Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issues number 7, 8, and 9 of Invincible Ironman, written by Gerry Duggan. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. Now when it comes to this review, I was a little bit behind, so I decided to release all 3 issues at one time to get everyone caught up to speed. And let me just say that Gerry Duggan did not disappoint on this series in my opinion. For Iron Man plays a key part in the destruction of mutant kind as well as its resistance before, during, and after the HELLFIRE Gala. So with that out there, the issue begins with Tony and Rhodey observing a Stark Unlimited factory in Texas. Now at this factory, Phylong is using Stark tech to create Sentinels to hunt mutants, which is something Tony cannot tolerate, for he refuses to let the Sentinels come online and be associated with his name. However, it's important to note that Tony and Rhodey are fully aware that their actions are completely illegal and could result in imprisonment or death. But nevertheless, Tony is willing to take the risk and do whatever it takes to stop this from going down. So, with that said, Iron Man walks up to the front gate with a gigantic weapon in hand and tells the guards on duty that there has been an increase in workplace violence in this country, and he suggests that everyone clock out early tonight and come in late tomorrow. For he has a job he must do and he prefers no one to get hurt. So with that warning out there and the massive steel doors melted, the employees do just that and quickly evaluate the building. Now Tony's plan was simple. Iron Man was supposed to kick down the door and be seen sabotaging the production of the Stark Sentinels. Then after the sensors has confirmed that all the civilians had cleared out, Iron Man then would deploy his little surprise once everyone was safely away. For the goal was to make the most expensive crater in all of Texas. But see, the ulterior motive for Iron Man doing this was to see how far along the production was, which to his surprise was too far. For the Sentinels came online and attacked Iron Man, so with the Sentinels blasting away at Iron Man, we discover that the person in the suit isn't Tony but instead Rhodey, for Rhodey is one of the only people he can trust with knowledge about his weapons cache. Now if you remember correctly, Tony has spent most if not all his money on buying up weapons around the world. And on that night, some of the more powerful explosives and ordnance came in real handy. So with the hornet's nest pissed, Rhodey quickly took off, with the death machines in hot pursuit. Now, if you asked 10 different people who Tony Stark is, you'd get a dozen answers, which includes inventor, avenger, alcoholic, capitalist pig, hero, and even villain. But the truth is, he was probably all of those things. And through it all, Rhodey's remained his best and most loyal friend, which is why Rhodey was the only person he could trust with his suit. So with Rhodey trying to get out of Dodge, and the Sentinel looking the other way, Tony now has a little room to sneak around in his new stealth armor, the Mark Nil. Because in Tony's words, there was no sense in giving this armor an official designation, especially since he was probably going to break every law in the books to get out of this jam. So as Rhodey put in work outside, blasting and dodging his way through the Sentinels, we jump back to Tony placing charges all over the death machines in preparation for destroying the whole factory. Now these charges are not conventional explosives, for they work in tandem with each other. They create a sphere and then implodes. It's kind of theoretical, because it was the only thing Tony has been working on since he learned about these abominations. So with everything in place, Tony wanted to do one last thing, check the code for the Sentinels. For he needed some hard evidence of misdoings to show people so they could stop cheering for those things. But upon looking into them, he is shocked to discover that Phylong didn't just program them to stop mutants, but he also programs them to take out non-mutant heroes too, like Johnny Storm. Now with that crazy data in hand, Rhodey was blindsided by the Sentinels outside and Tony was caught while placing his last device. But with his friend in trouble, Tony did the only move he had in play, which was to detonate the implosion devices, causing the factory to go up in flames. Now the aftershock of that did destroy the robots, and sent Tony flying as well as gave Rhodey the distraction he needed to get to his War Machine armor. But right in the middle of switching over, the Sentinels once again opened fire at Rhodey, but this time he had no armor to protect him. So with our hero badly hurt, the Sentinels declare Rhodey to be under arrest, and within moments he was surrounded by Sentinels and Orcus shock troopers. And as for Tony, he could only look on helplessly from the shadows in a suit of armor that no one could detect, as his best friend was arrested for something he put him up to. Now the next day, we see Orcus overlooking the devastation left by Tony and Rhodey. which pissed them off because they find out they will not be able to create enough Sentinels before the deadline. So with this heavy blow dealt to their original plans, Orcus decided to come up with an insidious backup plan that involved the murder of one of their employees. Because at first, Tony thought all he had to do was pay Rhodey's bail to get him free. But unfortunately for our heroes, Phylong and Orcus had other plans to get back at Tony. Because you have to understand that Orcus expected to have an entire army of Sentinels before the gala, but due to Tony and Rhodey's interference, that number was dramatically cut down. So to get back at our heroes, Phylong had Nimrod kill one of the Stark Unlimited foremen and blamed the heroes for doing it. So because of that twist in events, Tony is now on the run, and Rhodey is going to trial for murder. So before Tony could think, the urge to self-destruct kicked in. So he punched and punched again and again until he couldn't feel his hand. He forgot whether it was a former therapist or a former bartender who observed that he built an armor for his friend to protect him from himself. And now because of his actions, Rhodey is no longer in the armor he made and is now stuck in hell. The feeling of not being able to help his friend left Tony nauseous, lightheaded, angry, and craving a drink. Because Phylong was going to kill his friend and he couldn't stop it. So with that said, issue number 7 comes to an end, which leads us to issue number 8. Because this issue picks up after the events of the HELLFIRE Gala. So with that said, issue 8 opens with Tony seeking legal advice from She-Hulk on how to best free Rhodey from jail after he was falsely accused of killing the Orcus's foreman. But see, that was just the start of his issues, because apparently since Phylong took over Stark Unlimited, he now technically owns the patents and technology in Tony's Iron Man suits. And with a cease and desist out there on Tony, he is left with little to no options at his disposal. So with his back against the wall, he goes on to ask Jan, how would a Hulk deal with this issue? Which she replies with, as a Hulk, she would smash everything in sight, and then she goes on to suggest that he should move his base of operations to a foreign nation, international waters, or a place like Krakoa. So with defeat on the horizon, Tony couldn't shake the feeling of failure. And upon entering the streets, overhead, the sight of his greatest achievements Frankensteined into giant killer robots was sickening to him. But the faces of the people in the street were enough to finish the job. And because of that turn of events, Tony will make sure the truth is written about Phylong's abominations. Now on a side note, Tony ended up selling his capstand, at a loss, to cover Rhodey's legal bills which were mounting up. And the reason why he did this was because Tony himself was planning on going underground to fight from the shadows. But before he could do that, there were several things he had to do, and turning over his Mark 70 Iron Man suit to Phylong was on that list. But following the attack by Captain Krakoa during the HELLFIRE Gala, Iron Man ultimately decided to hold on to the suit for one last mission, to track down the people behind the massacre. So following that, we skip ahead to Iron Man meeting up with Rogue and Captain America at the Brooklyn Bridge following Orcus's failed assassination attempt on Steve Rogers. The three decided to travel to DC to get to the bottom of the situation together. But by the time Rogue, Cap, and Iron Man arrived at the U.S. Capitol, the attack was already over, the wounded were carted off and finger-pointing had already begun. In retrospect, the false flag attack on DC accomplished two things: it whipped up ugly violent sentiments, and it got all the white hats looking the same way. So following all that, Tony returned to New York City a couple of hours later to call it a night, only to discover his evening was just beginning. For one of Phylong's Sentinels had taken an interest in an office building. And what would happen next might have gone differently if he had been wearing his Mark Nil stealth armor, but he was still repairing it after the attack on the Sentinel factory. So with no other options available, Tony went in for a closer look, just to see none other than Emma Frost and Wilson Fisk signing legal documents that will play a big part later in the story. So anyway, as the Sentinel went in for the attack, Tony immediately jumped in and disabled its jet propulsion, which caused the gigantic Sentinel to crash to the ground. So with several seconds to spare, Tony and Emma exchanged a few words and came to the conclusion that Orcus must be behind both the attack on DC and Krakoa. But before the two could agree on helping each other, the Sentinels made the decision easy for them by smacking Iron Man out of the sky and into a food truck, before crushing him under its boot. Following that, we transfer back over to Emma Frost, giving Phylong a second chance to turn back, by informing him that he bit off more than he could chew by attacking mutant kind. But see, from Phylong's standpoint, he has nothing to worry about. Considering, from the world's perspective, the mutants have attacked Congress first. So with the majority of mankind standing in favor of Fei Long's actions, he is encouraged to believe that he is the surgeon who would be solely responsible for removing the mutant cancer from the world. So with his stance clear, Emma quickly takes her unbreakable diamond form and charges into battle. But just like Tony, she was sent flying into the street beside him. So with the Sentinels closing in on them, Tony volunteers to cover for Emma's escape, due to the fact that the mutants are currently in the hot seat with mankind. And with a winning strategy in mind, he didn't need Emma to slow him down. So with that out there, Emma decided to take Tony up on his offer and made her way into the train station below. So just as Emma made her escape, Tony went on the offensive only to discover the Sentinels were nowhere to be found. And just like that, the two Sentinels crushed Tony between their fists. So with Tony badly hurt, Emma immediately went to check in on our hero to ensure that he was still alive. So with Tony calling out for help at the mercy of the gigantic robotic Sentinels, Emma took it upon herself to enter Tony's mind. And once in there, we see that Tony is not in good condition at all, and in fact, he truly believes that he is at death's doorstep. So with our hero unable to function at this time, Emma took it upon herself to take the steering wheel and pilot Tony's body until he is able to do so. So with Emma controlling Tony's body, she did everything within her power to keep him alive. So with time running out, it was now or never for Tony to take control of himself. And just like that, Tony was back in the driver's seat and ready to go. But unfortunately, for Emma, things weren't going as well for her as it was getting for Tony. For Emma was now a captive of Fei Long's Sentinels with an inhibitor collar around her neck. So with Fei Long's target in hand, Emma tells Tony to make sure the world knows the truth about tonight, no matter what happens. But see, Tony wasn't about to let Emma die at the hands of his creations. So without any hesitation, Tony dropped to the ground and surrendered his suit in exchange for her life, begging him to allow Emma to stand trial for her crimes. So with Fei Long weighing his options, Tony asked Emma why she stayed to help him, to which she replied by saying it was an act of self-preservation. But regardless of the reasons for Emma saving Tony, being a good capitalist, couldn't allow himself to remain within Emma's debt. And he took it upon himself to balance his books by initiating the rescue protocol. Now, this protocol is designed to force his armor on the person of his choosing, which in this case is Emma, and fly them to safety against their will. Which was exactly what he did. So with Emma flying out of danger, Fei Long yells for his Sentinels to stop her, because he needs her dead or alive to accomplish his mission. But with Emma lost in the wind, Tony calls out to his rival and tells him that he knows Fei Long wants him dead, so why don't they just skip the BS and kill him already? Because Tony is fully aware that Fei Long can't kill an Avenger in the streets. So with Tony Stark on his knees, we transition from issue 8 to issue 9. Now this issue picks up immediately after the previous one. And let me just say that Tony Stark is not in the best condition. So with that out there, Tony states that bluffing is at least 50% of capitalism and some smaller percentage of the Avenger business. Now when it comes to Tony, he is no stranger to bluffing, but he usually never bluffs with anything this important on the line. For he had nightmares like this before. But this time it wasn't something as small as playing cards or trading stocks or any other addictions he once had. Because this time he was playing for his life. But the longer Fei Long waited and thought about it, the stronger Tony's hand became. So with Fei Long sending his Sentinels back on the hunt for Emma Frost, Captain America arrives on the scene with his motorcycle ready to help his fallen comrade. But see, this whole thing was a part of Tony Stark's plan, for he did not want Captain America to help him and bring him to the hospital. Because he didn't wish for Fei Long to see him getting any help from his friends. Because if Fei Long believes that Tony is completely broken and alone, then ultimately, Fei Long would think it's over, that he has completely beaten Tony. So with that said, he goes on to tell Captain America that he has built a new suit that will allow him to continue to be an Avenger. But for the time being he'll have to go dark and into hiding. So the less Cap knows about his movements the better. So with that explanation, Tony begins to make his way down into the sewers below the city. So with pain aching all over his body, Tony stumbled his way onto the train tracks and began to travel. Now the way he was able to navigate the tunnels was by using his phone. Because his phone has a discrete tracker in it for his armor that Emma Frost had on. So after an hour of navigating through the twisted maze below the city, he finally arrived at the lowest point of Manhattan where his armor sat in wait. And one of the first things Tony did upon arrival was free Emma from the suit. Now, initially, Emma Frost was completely pissed off about being trapped inside his armor, but as soon as she saw Tony Stark's injuries, she immediately went to his aid. So with Tony taking a seat, the two started to have a little bit of a conversation. And during that conversation, Tony lets Emma know that he barely escaped, for he has received a stay of execution because Fire is smart enough not to kill an Avenger in the streets. But see, just because Fire didn't kill him at that present moment, didn't mean Fire didn't have several additional plans in the works for when he was ready to do the deed. So with that out there, Tony proceeded to say, "Don't be surprised if one day you find out that I turned up in a gutter with alcohol poisoning. Because the public wouldn't even think twice about that kind of situation, for there's absolutely no bottom to the people nowadays. Because nowadays people can lie online with impunity, and those who don't fear you will hate you because of your success. So everyone with a social media account is now just a useful idiot for Fire to use to spread his lies." So following that dialogue, Tony hands Emma Frost his phone in order to show her what is going on in the world at large. For once, Emma got the phone. She found out that Orcus was saying that the mutant medicines were laced with a kill switch, which Tony unfortunately was able to confirm it as true with Vision's testimony. So with Emma in disbelief, she goes on to say that this is turning out to be the perfect frame job. So with everything going south, she tries to reach out to her girls psychically, but due to Charles forcing the mutants to enter the gates, Emma was unable to sense any of them. So as grief begins to overcome Emma, Tony lets her know that they cannot do despair right now, for they have to regain the high ground as fast as possible. And if the worst indeed happened, then the remaining X-Men have to fight to fix it and make everything right. So with that little motivational speech given, Tony begins to put his suit back on and inform her that it will be in her best interest to stay down here for just a little bit longer. Because in the meantime, he has to go above ground to check in on a few little things before returning. Because if he is right, he may have an idea about how he might be able to hide her moving forward. So as he begins to walk out, Emma stops him with a question, for she wants to know what if they're all truly dead. In which Tony responds with, "Then you will avenge them." Now Tony felt terrible about leaving Emma alone, especially after everything she just went through. But this armor had become albatross around his neck, and he had to make sure James Rhodey was okay. Because while Tony's friend was in jail, let's just say Orcus members within the prison system weren't treating him kindly. So to remedy the situation, Tony once again sold his cap stand at a significant loss. He was doing everything and anything he could to try to get Rhodey out. Because make no mistake about it, Rhodey is fighting for his life, literally. As you know, Rhodey can throw down, but the way he was looking didn't give She-Hulk a vote of confidence for his longevity. And when she brought this up to the warden, it was of no surprise that he was playing for the other team and on Fei Long's payroll. So with the stakes clear, Tony was fully aware that Fei Long wanted to have Rhodey murdered just so he could watch Tony suffer. So with the chips stacked against him, She-Hulk informs Tony to give Fei Long back his armor and get a new lawyer because she has to dump him in order to help Rhodey. Now with that out there, we jump over to Start Unlimited HQ with Fei Long taking pictures with several of his employees when out of nowhere, the Iron Man armor came crashing right through the window. Now, before Tony threw this armor through the window, he made sure to hollow the armor out of any technology he may use in the future. But anyway, Tony made sure to tell Fei Long to call off the attacks on Rhodey in prison or suffer the consequences. In which Fei Long proceeds to play dumb and asks if his friend is experiencing some discomfort in jail. So with Tony storming down the road, he walks by a liquor store and which, for a brief moment, he considers giving into the temptation and into his weakness. But quickly our hero pulls himself out of that mindset and refocuses his mind on his goal, which was getting revenge on Fei Long. So with no time to spare, he immediately walks into a wig shop before returning to the sewers. Now upon returning to his suit, Tony was surprised Emma Frost stayed waiting for his arrival. So with the two heroes alone, Tony tells her that he was able to pick up some essentials as well as some information she may be interested in. For he tells her that the Sentinels are on the hunt and there is news of mass mutant deportations to Araco going down. Now, as one would expect, this casual conversation began to boil over. Because at this point in the story, both Emma and Tony are at their wits' end due to all the obstacles that were thrown in their way. So with Tony yelling out how all of this could have been avoided if they would have listened to him at the previous key party when he informed them that Fei Long was outmaneuvering them, Emma claps back with how they should have never made that promise not to kill humans, for that was one of their biggest mistakes. But right when she said that, Tony proceeded to have a panic attack, while still concussed from the attack from the night before. So with the stress of Rhodey's life hanging in the balance for just knowing him, Tony breaks down in a moment of weakness and pleads for any measure of help. So with Tony crumbling before her, she quickly took action and brought Tony's mind to a safer place. She took his mind back to California, when everything was so much easier for him. For the days he spent in the hangars were among the best days of his life. So with Tony slowly beginning to come around, he starts to focus on what he really needs to do in order to move forward. Now his first step on his agenda was to create 2 new armors, for he was not just willing to die for this cause, but he was also willing to earn that Interpol warrant. But he wanted to go about this a little smarter, for he had a lot of engineering to do to overcome those Sentinels. And it's going to require a whole new technology that will take some time to create. But see, time is something they don't have on their side. But regardless of the obstacles before them, they still managed to come to an agreement. An agreement that will remain until the death of their enemies. So as the conversation within his mind comes to an end, Tony pulls out a ring from his pocket and places it on her finger. Because while he was away, he did some tinkering and took a psi shield out of his Mark 70 before turning it over and converted it into a ring, so Emma could use it to hide her abilities and allow her to navigate undetected by the Sentinels. But see, that wasn't the only thing he was working on. Because he also pulled the wig out of his bag to act as some form of disguise that would allow her to move about under the name Hazel Kendall. So with these 2 tools in hand, Emma quickly puts both on as they proceed to make their way to the Hellfire Club. Because following the events of the Hellfire Gala, when Emma became a refugee, she knew she had to put some things in place in order to secure her future if she wanted any chance to fight against Orcus and getting her revenge. Now one of the things she had to move was her money. She had to make sure her money was safely transferred to a third party so no one could take it. So with that said, the 2 entered the club only to find out the new White King was meeting with his attorneys. And to Tony's surprise, he finds out that the new White King is none other than Wilson Fisk, which put the meeting in the previous issue in perspective for him. So with that said, issue number 9 of Invincible Iron Man comes to an end. And let me just say, I am surprised at how much I actually like this Iron Man comic line, because it ties in perfectly into the X-Men story to the point where they should have the Fall of X on its cover. And on top of that, it is also good to see the Avengers actually involving themselves with the X-Men struggles, because usually they tend to ignore mutant issues and focus on their own problems. And with Tony on his way to create a new suit, I wondered what modifications this suit would have to set it apart from the others. So down in the comment section below, let me know your thoughts about this issue and what predictions you could have moving forward. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.